Good evening. My name is Barbara Thompson, and I'm recording my final video course journal for the course Human Sexuality through Colorado Christian University. This is a follow-up to the first video journal I did, where I answered several questions about human sexuality and what I knew. And this is a follow-up to that, and I will be re-answering the same questions that I answered in the first one. And the first question was, after what you have learned in this class, what is your understanding of healthy sexuality? And I maintain the answer that I gave at the beginning of the course, which is, I quoted Terry Cohen-Hoven in saying, sex is between our legs, but sexuality is between our ears. It is part and parcel of who we are as human beings. It's part of the whole makeup of a person. It's not just one isolated part. It's not the most important part, but it is a part of what it means to be a complete human being. And through the course of using this book, Introduction to Human Sexuality by Carroll, there were online course modules and quizzes that we could take, and I utilized those resources. And in Chapter 9, there was a reading called A Model of Coming Out in Module 9.6. And this is talking about homosexuality, but something in the makeup of how it was worded made me feel like this was appropriate for all people with regard to their sexuality, whether homosexual or heterosexual or bisexual. The different stages in coming out were listed this way. The first one was identity confusion. The second, identity comparison. The third, identity tolerance. The fourth, identity acceptance. The fifth, identity pride. But stage 6, identity synthesis, is the one that I wanted to focus on for our purposes here. And let me read that to you. This is from the Cengage CourseMate materials for the book Human Sexuality. It says, as the individual truly becomes comfortable with his or her lifestyle, and as non-sexual homosexual contacts increase, the person realizes the inaccuracy of dividing the world into good gays and lesbians and bad heterosexuals. No longer is sexual orientation seen as the sole identity by which an individual can be characterized. The person lives an open gay lifestyle so that disclosure is no longer an issue, and realizes that there are many sides and aspects to personality of which sexual orientation is only one. The process of identity formation is complete. And I want to restate that. They realize that there are many aspects and sides to personality of which sexual orientation is only one. And I feel like that is what healthy sexuality is. That you look at the totality of your life and the totality of your person. I would say that most people fall under that. I believe that probably gay and lesbian individuals have a little bit more difficulty in that area of, in the words of Popeye, I am what I am. And I believe that they're making strides in that area. But that, to me, is what true healthy sexuality is, recognizing it as part of who we are. Not the most important part, mind you, but just part of the complete human being that God made us to be. The second question was, what are some pros and cons of studying sexuality and using research in the exploration and understanding of sexuality? Now, I do believe that one of the pros is there is more information. And I still maintain that that doesn't mean we use it wisely or that it is used properly. And that is my biggest concern after taking this course, is that so much of the data being compiled and interpreted, the way the data is being interpreted, I believe is agenda-driven, particularly with regards to orientation. Because according to Carroll, in Introduction to Human Sexuality, and this is a quote, scholars generally agree that between 3% and 4% of males are predominantly gay, 1.5% to 2% of women are predominantly lesbian, and about 2% to 5% of people are bisexual. This is by Jenkins and Lauman. Why then the focus on homosexuality if it is such a minority? And all aspects of human personality need to be explored. All orientations do need to be recognized. But there is such an overwhelming emphasis on homosexuality and bisexuality study. In fact, in this book, there's, for every heterosexual picture, there's a homosexual picture. And I just feel like it's very unbalanced. Considering the scholars agree what a great minority it is, why then the intense focus on homosexuality and bisexuality? Again, I believe an agenda is at work here. Just my personal opinion. The third question is, what are the differences in the presentations of healthy sexuality between our textbooks and Scripture? Now, our textbooks were 3, and I will give my assessment of each one. Carroll, as I've already stated, Introduction to Human Sexuality, is very clinical, and the book is more, honestly, like a handbook, a how-to manual, than a scholarly treatment to me. I'm sorry, I just felt like the underlying motive for the book was to give young adults instructions as to how to engage in sexual behavior. Not, here are the pros and cons, here are the risks, here are the benefits. You make a decision, but here, this is how you do it. This is how this is done. This is how that is done. And I just didn't feel like it was a very, very scholarly treatment of the material for a college textbook. Honestly, that was just my opinion. Another book that we used was by Kay Arthur. It's called The Truth About Sex. And The Truth About Sex is an in-depth Bible study guide to the topic of what sex is and how God designed it to be used. Very biblical. Everything comes back to a biblical reference. And she also addresses the consequences of not following God's instructions, because God, being the creator and manufacturer and designer of this process that we call sexuality, He is the final authority on how that sexuality should be used. So she goes very much in depth through the Scripture, what it says about how our sexuality is to be used and what the consequences are for us if we use it in a way that's improper according to the manufacturer. She also gives a prescription to follow to correct past failures and mistakes, and assures us that there is not anything, there is no sin that is outside of the reach of God's redemptive power and cleansing in our lives, and that we're not damaged goods if we have not followed God's model for our lives in this area, that we're not beyond hope. God can help us, God can change us, God can cleanse us from those sins, like He can any sin. And our third textbook was Real Sex, The Naked Truth About Chastity by Lauren Winter. And this text specifically looks at the spiritual discipline of chastity and how do we go about using our sexual appetites in the proper way, and the spiritual discipline of controlling our appetites. And this could actually apply to any appetite or area in our life that requires discipline. Discipline actually is a good term for what God calls us to be, is disciplined in all areas of life. And I'd like to quote from Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, which I felt like had a very good definition and an assessment of how these different books have kind of worked for me through this class. And it's talking about controlling our appetites. This is on the chapter called Sexual Morality. And it says, for any happiness, even in this world, quite a lot of restraint is going to be necessary. So the claim made by every desire, when it is strong, to be healthy and reasonable, counts for nothing. Every sane and civilized man must have some set of principles by which he chooses to reject some of his desires and to permit others. One man does this on Christian principles, another on hygienic principles, another on sociological principles. The real conflict is not between Christianity and nature, but between Christian principles and other principles in the control of nature. For nature, in the sense of natural desire, will have to be controlled anyway, unless you are going to ruin your whole life. The Christian principles are admittedly stricter than the others, but then we think you will get help towards obeying them, which you will not get towards obeying the others. And I think that if we look at all three of our textbooks and the material that is presented, Introduction to Human Sexuality shows us the natural desires and the natural appetites. The Truth About Sex puts them in the biblical model and how they are designed to operate. And the real truth, real sex, the naked truth about chastity, tells us how to discipline them according to Christian principles. I think that we can learn a lot by synthesizing all three sources together. But I'm honestly a little bit nervous for the future generation if all the information they're getting is from Introduction to Human Sexuality, because there are no principles involved with it. And as C.S. Lewis said, all of our appetites have to be controlled in some respect, have to be disciplined in some respect by some principles. And if there are no principles to stand on, then where are you? Okay. The final question is, what has influenced your views of sexuality? Are there any changes to your perceptions or ideas that will change the decisions that you make? As I stated before, probably the thing that has influenced my view of sexuality the most is my upbringing and the experiences that I went through in my formative years and the mistakes that I've made along the way. I am thankful that God saw fit to pull me up out of the pit that my sin had dug me into and save me and cleanse me and make it possible for me to live a spirit-filled life with His help. One thing that has changed my perceptions since taking this course is I knew that the world's view of sex was damaging. I did not realize the depth to which the lie from the beginning that we could be our own boss and that it doesn't matter what we do, we can do what we want, it's our life. I guess I didn't really realize how deeply that is entrenched in our whole social fabric in our country in the last 50 years. Honestly, I guess I had just kind of not paid attention. And the thing that I took away most from this course was the world has a crying need for values to be taught, that certain things are right and certain things are wrong, and that there is absolute truth. It's not whatever you want to do is fine with you, but you don't tell me what to do. That takes us back to the days that it talks about in Judges, where every man did that which was right in his own eyes, and that's anarchy and that's chaos. That's not healthy. That's not constructive for anybody. Those who want to tear down biblical values don't have anything to put in their place to protect the weak, to protect the innocent, to protect the fabric of society. And as the old saying is, nature abhors a vacuum. If it's not filled with godly principles, it will be filled with worldly principles. And that is the road our society is on. And to me, that is what we need to do more than anything, is to reestablish healthy, God-directed values towards sexuality if our next generation is not going to reap the even more horrific consequences than they already have. And that concludes my video presentation.